Hey guys, right now I'm going to be making the daily progress summary for things done through January 1st, 2023. So we are kicking off a new year here, and it just so happened that the Sunday that I am making this ministry progress summary for was actually the very first day of the year. So here's the summary here of the things that I spent time on this cycle. So I was with my family over the holidays and spent a lot of time relaxing, trying to recharge my batteries, so to speak, so that I can come back kind of with a refreshed mind and tackle things here as the new year kicks off. So in the process of taking time off work and spending time with my family, I also made a good bit of progress on several various upcoming studies, and we'll go over those a little bit more here in this progress update, although I didn't actually finish any of these enough to publish anything. There were also several other practical things that I did, like I built a standing desk, and that will serve as the speaking podium out in the living room when we're doing Bible studies at the house. And as we'll see, there were a couple other things too. But these were primarily the things that I got done here in this cycle. So as to relaxing with family, not a lot to say here. I did take about a full week off work here between Christmas and New Year's, and I spent the holidays visiting with my family and recharging. I went down to see my parents and my siblings and things like that. So I'm glad to do this. It is one of the only times during the year where I actually take a substantial amount of vacation. And so, had a relaxing time with the visit, and hopefully it'll help me kind of be recharged here as I dive into things in the new year here. As to the studies in the ministry that I mentioned, I am in the middle right now of drafting a study discussing the exact nature of judge not when properly interpreted. So we have this passage here in Matthew chapter 7, talking about do not judge so that you will not be judged, for in the way you judged, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. And so the passage goes on, I think through verse 5, I want to say here in Matthew chapter 7, and there are other passages that talk about judging in the New Testament as well. Off the top of my head, there's one in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 through 5, where Paul talks about judging nothing before the time. And so God, in final judgment, will kind of lay everything bare, because God has this omniscient perspective that we lack. And so Paul tells us to not even judge ourselves, judge nothing before the time. That's another passage that's sort of relevant here. So exactly what does it mean for us to not judge? And at the same time, we have to have a degree of spiritual discernment, because Matthew 10:16, Jesus tells us to be as innocent as doves and yet as wise as serpents. And so we kind of have this obligation to, for example, choose our friends wisely, choose the Bible teachers we listen to wisely, and figure out how we ought to spend our time. And all of these things require a certain amount of spiritual discernment. And so that can't quite be what judging means. And so sorting out all of the complexities here and sort of the purpose of the study that I started here. And I actually started that study on judging when I was partway through a different one outlining some issues in the modern church visible. Such as, for example, a lack of emphasis put on serious Bible teaching as compared to the amount of time that's spent on music and social time. And that's just an example. And then also, in addition to that, sort of the lack of commitment that many self-professed Christians nowadays demonstrate, given the amount of time that people spend watching TV shows and browsing social media and other things like this, video games too maybe come to mind, rather than reading their Bibles or taking in Bible teaching. And so, of course, those two things are kind of our duty and our obligation as Christians. It's how we grow in the truth. It's how we come to spiritual maturity and then help others do likewise. And so that should sort of be priority number one for us. But nowadays, it's very common for people who say that they're Christian and maybe they go to church once a week to end up spending a lot more of their time on these other things that are part of the world rather than some of these spiritual priorities. And so, of course, this isn't ideal. And these things aren't really fun to talk about, but they're necessary because a lot of modern churchgoers seem to be blind to the decline that we have of care towards the Bible and God's truth. So the Bible, learning, believing, and applying it needs to be the focus of our assembly. It is the entire point of church, more or less. And going to church is supposed to help you learn the Bible from a teacher who's qualified and prepared, and then you have a community that we can exhort one another and help one another understand the truth better. That's sort of the purpose of church for us, and yet many people seem to sort of lose sight of this. And so that was initially what I was working on writing. And then I branched off into this other study about judging after I realized that it kind of might be a good idea to firmly establish that shooting it straight and calling a spade, these kind of not like analogies, but these ways of phrasing the concept here, these are not something to be shy about for us as Christians, right? This is absolutely something that's merited in situations where we need to exhort one another to hold ourselves to the standards that we're called to as Christians. So pointing out unpleasant truths in a level-handed manner to lovingly exhort people to turn more towards the truth is not the sort of self-righteous, condemnatory judgment called out in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 and following. So the sort of hypocritical, self-righteous, condemnatory judgment that's called out in that passage is kind of looking down on others, hating them in our hearts, thinking that we're somehow so much better than others. That is the point of that passage, but some of these kind of hard truths that we need to examine and be honest with ourselves about, and in particular, not be shy about kind of shooting it straight, taking a hard look at how things really are rather than sticking our head in the sand. That doesn't make us judgmental. That's just speaking the truth. And of course, we need to do it in a loving way. We should not be overly bitterly harsh on others and especially self-righteous in all of this. But the point is we need to actually say the truth rather than shrinking from it. And so what I mean by all of these things will probably be more clear as I finish and publish all these studies. So I'm just giving a little bit of an overview about where my focus has been. And so I say studies, plural. There's a lot more going into all of this. For example, in the one talking about some of the issues in the modern church, I go into this idea also of why it's okay for us to kind of be taking such a pessimistic view of things, because throughout history, a lot of people have sort of had this idea that God wouldn't possibly let the church go off the rails. God, would kind of protect and shepherd the church so that, we'd always have for example, people in leadership that are qualified to be there, kind of steering the church in a good direction and things like that. And, I kind of spend time demonstrating how that's not necessarily the case as well. And so, for example, at the time that Jesus was born, the Pharisees were in almost complete control of the teaching of the sort of the religious institutions in Israel. And of course, their particular brand of Judaism is very legalistic and it gets a lot wrong. And so this idea that God would never let kind of the truth be stamped out, would never let the church visible, so to speak, the institutions that people think of when they think of Christianity, organized religion, if you will, never let that kind of go off the rails or go in a bad direction. We already have historical precedent that says that's not true. So I just, things like that, these are, again, somewhat pessimistic, unfortunate, hard truths that need to be pointed out so that we have a realistic picture of kind of the current state of the church and how we need to act to kind of try to do better in these regards. And we can't do that if we kind of purposefully blind ourselves to this. And so that is going to be the focus. Again, not real fun stuff, but it is a necessary exercise to take. And that's kind of why I'm spending time here towards the beginning of my own output here in the ministry. So that was the progress on the studies that I did here. And so I don't know, I don't want to necessarily promise and commit to, maybe having stuff published by the next cycle. We'll see how long it takes. I want to do things right, of course, and support everything that I write with Scripture and, not be hasty and feeling like I have to push things out there, but make sure that I do a good job and, things like that. And, I may start with just specific sections, rather than posting the entire finished thing all at once. But you have to be kind of careful in doing that too, because some things like logically depend on each other and what happens if I change the order and things like that. So, we'll see. I will try to get far enough that hopefully I can start, at least publishing some of the sections that I finished here. Because I've written some, quite a few pages actually on some of these matters, but I'm not quite ready to publish it yet. So that was progress on the various studies here. And then on the practical front, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but kind of as mentioned in the summary at the beginning, I spent time building the standing desk. So I ordered one off Amazon when it was on sale and came in a whole bunch of pieces actually. And so, it had like a lot of pieces, like 100 some odd or whatever with all the bolts and the screws and stuff. And so I had to look at the diagrams, figure out how to put it all together, spent spent some time over a weekend, several hours putting the desk together, and I'm happy with how it turned out. It actually, especially considering what I paid for it, I think it'll work really well. And then I kind of have these monitors with adjustable stands that I kind of have tilted to like 45 degrees. And so this is going to kind of be like the speaking podium when we're doing Bible studies out in the living room. And that way I'll be able to have my notes on the monitors in front of me, but because they're going to be on this standing desk that I can adjust the height of, I'm going to have them a little bit lower, kind of towards the level of where my keyboard is, level with my arms. That way I can glance down to refresh myself of what I'm talking about off my notes, but it won't block people's view of me when I'm speaking. And so that's going to be kind of the plan here for that, the speaking podium there. I also built these custom foam backings for the projector screens to make them straight and flush with the wall. So I have these like the screens that I got off Amazon for the projector pictures. One of them is 150 inches in the living room. That's the one that we'll be using for Bible studies. And to make the screen perfectly straight, which is necessary to get the picture or the image from the projector kind of properly centered, I needed to make these like spacer things basically. And so that was kind of a DIY project that I did here over winter break as well to get the projected image better centered on the screens by kind of making these foam backing on the top of the screen to make the top of the screen kind of stay flush and straight compared to the bottom where it's supported by the legs. So maybe that's kind of hard to visualize without, actually showing a picture of it. But, it was kind of this project that I had to do to make the projector screens kind of sit properly against the wall, basically. And then I also sequenced my really big to-do list here when I had time over this holiday break. And so I have literally hundreds of things on this master list. So a good bit of it is ministry stuff, of course, but I also have stuff on personal website, refactoring stuff on the theme that I have, and the static site preprocessor and keyboard layout stuff, and design projects relating to bicycles and all of my other interests and stuff. I have just an enormous number of things on this list. And I do try to kind of prioritize it every once in a while, make sure that I'm spending time on the things that are most important to me and things like that. And so, it is intimidating because there's so much on it. It's only gotten worse. I thought maybe I'd have all this time after I graduated college, but now I have even more irons in the fire at any given point in time. So I have, like I said, hundreds and hundreds of things on this list, but as ever, it will always only be one step at a time. So, you can't let that get to you when you have a really big list of things. You just kind of have to start, take it one day at a time, do your best to always be productive and be getting things done. And so I focused, of course, here on the ministry stuff, mapping out the next steps for the content that I'm planning to focus on in sort of the short term and the medium term. But, I have all sorts of other stuff as well. But, trying to reprioritize, it's something I try to take a step back and do every once in a while, reprioritize stuff on the ministry front to make sure that I'm headed in the direction I want to be headed in. So, again, not going to spend more time there. These were some of the practical things. I mean, there were a couple other things, but, practical stuff getting done as well this cycle. And then that brings us to the last bit here about what am I planning on doing in the short term next. So I'm going to continue working on all the studies I mentioned. So the one about judging, and then the one going over some issues in the modern church, and kind of that hard look we need to take at what can we be doing better given some tendencies in our culture and things like that. So those are probably going to be my primary output focus for the next little bit until I get more done on those. And then hopefully I'll also start soon to get involved in local fellowships. And so I need to do a bit of research to figure out exactly where I want to get involved, where I can start serving in my local community, as well as hopefully find, like a social group to plug into, and people who might be interested in Bible studies that we might have at the house and things like that. And so I'm going to hopefully start kind of kicking that off here now that I'm kind of more in production mode on the ministry side. And so, of course, that's something that I've been praying about for a while, and I'm hoping that we have good success and that we can find good communities to be a part of local to us here. So that's another thing. We'll see if it happens this next cycle in particular, but if not this next one, soon at least. So that's the upcoming plan here, keeping work on the studies I mentioned, and then getting involved locally, and kind of finishing off some other practical things that will be necessary for us to start up the Bible studies at the house. So all of that's the upcoming focus. So I hope this was informative for all those people keeping up to date with what's going on here. And so this was all of the things that I got done here through January 1st, 2023 on the ministry side, and I will talk to you all next time.